We haven't talked about Canon in a while, and today's probably a good day to start. When I woke up this morning, this was one of the headlines. This is from the big website. This is from Petapixel, and the headline reads, "Canon done making EF lenses until photographers demand more." And so I want to go through here a little bit because I think this is kind of interesting. So it says Canon is going all in on mirrorless. The company has revealed that it has no plans to create any new EF lenses for DSLRs unless photographers demand more. This is kind of interesting because just a couple days ago, they announced the new flagship, which is the Canon 1DX Mark III. But anyway, I digress. This goes on to quote Richard Shepard, who is Canon Europe's Pro Product Marketing Senior Manager, who is quoted as saying, "As you know, last year we launched the RF mount and the Eos R system." Shepard tells Digital Camera World, "And to date we've launched 10 critically acclaimed lenses, and it is a new system. We plan to continue this, launching more RF lenses while still fully supporting the EF lens system." Maybe slightly dramatic, and I'm not really sure when that interview for Digital Camera World was done, but it's an interesting statement with the timing of the Canon 1DX III. I want to talk about the RF lenses because I kind of figured this was their plan. I'm not sure they needed to say anything officially about it. The RF mount is the mirrorless mount, and I have 3 lenses that I've been working with over the last month that I'm working on reviews for that will come out in the next few weeks. And when I saw this, I thought this might be a good intro since I really haven't talked much about Canon mirrorless. So unless you've been living under a rock for the last 16 months, it's been pretty obvious that the big push over the last year is competing with Sony. And we've seen Canon and Nikon and their entry into the mirrorless system. We have Nikon with the Z mount and Canon with the RF mount. This is the Eos R, which is a strange camera, but I want to talk a little bit about these, and I want to break down the significance of what Canon specifically are doing in the mirrorless space in terms of optics with the 10 lenses that they already have out. I'm going to talk mainly about these 3, so that's what I want to get into. But really quick, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor today, who are the awesome folks over at Wine Country Camera. Wine Country Camera produces the best filter holder system available. In fact, it is the only filter holder system with a workflow for combining a circular polarizer, ND filters, and graduated filters, and making adjustments without ever disturbing critical focus. Their Blackstone filters use vapor deposition coating techniques and fire-polished shot ultra-white glass that are designed for high-resolution detail without the color shift that you find in many neutral-density filters. This system uses step-up rings to attach to any lens, and for wider-angle lenses with no filter threading, they have a 150mm system with custom-designed lens attachments. This is the system for serious landscape artists. Right now, you can use the link in the description to save 20% off of anything in the entire store by using offer code AOP on checkout. Once again, that offer code is AOP, and I want to give a special shout out and thank you to Wine Country Camera for sponsoring another episode of The Art of Photography. The 3 Canon RF lenses that I've been working with are the 15-35 f2.8, the 24-70 f2, which is quite a monster, as well as the 50mm f1.2, which is also big and chunky, but optically is incredible. Now, this is really interesting because Canon and Nikon have had 2 different approaches to this. Nikon have gone for f1.8 primes, f4 zooms largely, although we have seen 2 f2.8 zooms that have just come out. So they're working on it. Their strategy has been, we're going to go with stuff that's optically good, but pretty affordable. Canon have gone the opposite direction. They have gone with big, expensive lenses that are optically awesome. So which one of these is the right approach? Well, we don't know yet. I personally think it's way too early to tell. Both of these systems are on essentially version 1 of their camera bodies. Their first lenses are starting to come out, and there hasn't been enough time that's passed to tell of which is the right way to go, what's going to be more successful in the end. I respect both of these companies, Nikon and Canon. It's going to be interesting to see what they do. However, there is an article that Canon put on their website that I will link in the show description if you guys are interested. I strongly recommend reading this, but they talked about their approach to the RF lenses and lens design in general and what they've learned from all the years of doing not only the FD mount, but later the EF mount. And they basically boil it down to lens design being this triangle of 3 points. You've got optical quality, you've got price, and you've got size. And any time you decide you're going to go in one direction on that is going to affect the other 2. So for instance, if you're going to go for a higher optical quality, it probably will impact a more expensive price as well as the size of the actual lens. If you're trying to make a small compact lens, the price may go down and the optical quality might not not be as high as what you would find on another lens, if that makes sense. It is an interesting article, and of course it tells us a truth that we've probably known for years, but people tend to forget about. And we're into this world of a new system, a new mount, and so therefore we're going to have new lenses. So I think a lot of that explained their strategy as to what they were going for with new lenses. There was a comment that came out from Nikon around the same time, and they were talking about mainly, and I think this is a big marketing thing, they were talking about the size of the diameter of a mirrorless lens, and with a new mount, what that was going to allow them to do, which was basically point out that Sony have a smaller mount, therefore they can't do as much with their lenses. And yes, while there is a little bit of truth to that, the diameter of the throat being larger, it impacts what you can do with ray angle and the way light comes into the lens. It really only impacts the maximum aperture that you're allowed to have on the lens, and it's a little bit misleading because Sony can have an f.95 aperture on a lens, but what does have a major impact on lens design is the depth of the mount. The fact that the lens mount is actually just a couple millimeters above the sensor. Now, if we brag about that, that's a lot less competitive because Sony already have that, and you've got to find a way to compete. So the other statement was chosen in the marketing materials, but the depth of the mount does have a major impact. We no longer have a mirror here, so the lens can be a lot closer to the sensor. This has a huge impact with what you can do with designing a lens. Exhibit A. This is a Canon RF 28 to 70 millimeter standard zoom lens. It's a little different than what we normally consider to be a standard zoom lens. A standard zoom lens is a 24 to 70, so we've lost 4 millimeters off of this, but we've made a major gain in image quality, and we gained a little bit of aperture because this is an f2 zoom straight through the entire range. And what's interesting is when you look at the mount. So I don't know if you guys can see in here or not, but when we're out at 70, you see a little bit of space between the rear element and the actual lens mount. When I zoom this down to 28, it comes up to where it's very close to the mount. So it should be fairly obvious because they've taken advantage of that flange distance from the rear element of the lens to the sensor that this is a lens design that would not work on a DSLR. The DSLR has a mirror box, therefore the lens must be further forward, so that creates a design limitation that we've dealt with for years and years now. This has opened up doors for lens companies to start thinking about things very differently and to start producing really interesting stuff. Now, I mentioned the triangle of trade-offs in lens design earlier, and clearly that's what we're seeing here. There's a lot of trade-offs. So first of all, we docked 4 millimeters off of the wide end, and so this is a 28 to 70. One of the problems that you have inherently with a 24 to 70, it's actually a really hard lens to make, especially for mirrorless. You end up with a lot of field curvature, which we've talked about before on Lens Days. I will link up to a video if you're interested in learning more about field curvature. Most 24 to 70 millimeter lenses exhibit some kind of field curvature. The 28 to 70, and I'll talk about this when we do the review, does not. It is extremely flat, and it gives you a look that you can't get out of another lens. Now, the flip side of this is if we look back at that triangle that Canon was talking about, we went for maximum optical quality here. So the trade-off is the price. This is an expensive lens, and the size. It is a very big lens. In fact, I think to some people, depending on what kind of shooting you're interested in doing, this may be pretty impractical. This is going to be a lens that you're going to use for studio work, tripod work, that kind of thing. But I would actually go as far to say that the trade-offs in this lens aren't as bad as they could have been. Now, yes, this lens is expensive. The price was impacted. Obviously, the size was. This is a $3,000 lens, and I know that's nothing to sneeze at, but when you look at the optical quality, and this is kind of getting into Zeiss Otus territory. A Zeiss Otus is a prime lens. They're manual focus. They're F-mount, and they're also Canon EF mount. They come in 2 different mounts. They're very expensive. That's a $6,000 lens. When you realize that you're getting into that territory with the sharpness and the optical quality of this lens, it's a zoom lens, so if Zeiss made a zoom lens, this is considerably less expensive. It's about half the price of a Zeiss Otus, and you're getting a 28 to 70 focal range, so it is giving you more versatility than you would get with a prime lens. Now, I don't want to ignore Nikon. Remember, I said they had a completely different approach to what they're doing with the Z-mount system with the first year of lenses. This is probably my favorite in that lineup. It's the 50mm f1.8. Sure, it's not an f1.2, it's not an f1.4, it's an f1.8, but check this out. If we look at the rear lens element here, you can see that it is flush up against the mount. There's the glass right there. Same approach of taking advantage of that short flange distance between the rear element and the sensor, but in a much less expensive lens. This is a 50mm f1.8. I have owned many of the Nikon f50mm lenses, including the manual focus f1.2. This is by far my favorite lens that Nikon has made in 50mm. Yes, I know it's an f1.8. The contrast is excellent, the sharpness is excellent, clear across the frame, you get an incredible amount of detail, there's a lot of nice micro contrast. Yes, I know it's an f1.8. You're not going to have as shallow a depth of field, but the bokeh that this lens does give you renders extremely beautifully. I think it's a great lens, and I think it's a different approach using the same opportunities that we have with that shorter flange distance to do something completely different. Canon have gone expensive, Nikon have gone affordable. It's still a great lens. It's a much better value than some of these other lenses, and that's not a slam against Canon. This is a lens you want to buy and use every day. These are more specialty lenses. So there's a lot of options that we have as photographers and even as consumers. So two 50mm lenses. This one is $500. This one is 4 times as much at $2,000. This is the Canon f1.2 50mm. And is there a difference optically? Absolutely. The f1.2 has a completely different way of rendering. It is absolutely gorgeous. It's designed actually to where you can shoot it wide open. But this is a more practical option that gives you equally good, beautiful optical quality. And if you don't shoot wide open, if you're shooting around f4, 5, 6, then I think they're probably going to even out, and this is going to be the better deal. But I've said this before, when you start opening up that aperture, it's going to start increasing your price exponentially. And so we've gone from a 1.8 to a 1.2, and it's 4 times the cost of the 1.8. So the cool thing is that you have options. Now, it is really not surprising to see a statement made by Canon employees stating that they are not going to be developing EF lenses this year. They are putting all their cards into the mirrorless deck, into their RF mount. That is a little bit misleading to think that that's going to be screwing you out of optics that you might need. The Canon EF system has been around for a long time. It is a very mature system. They have every focal length available. They have tilt shift lenses. They have even versions 2 and 3 of specific lenses that they've been able to improve over the years. So it's a very mature system. There's nothing missing. What is missing is their mirrorless system. And that's where I think we're going to start to see some really interesting things this year. Now, I haven't mentioned Sony in this equation at all because it's a little bit different. Sony have been making mirrorless for a number of years now. They started from nothing and they've been able to work out a lot of the kinks. In fact, you can argue with the release this year of the A7R4 that they're in their 4th generation now of the A7 camera. We'll probably see an A7 IV this year. If there's ever an A7S, it might be a 4, who knows. But anyway, they are in their 4th generation. And so the lenses have been able to mature. The system's been able to mature. And when you compare something like the Eos R, which I think is kind of a strange camera actually, when I compare this to Sony's first version, this is Canon's first version, it's way better than Sony's first version will be. So there's going to be a lot of catching up over the next year, and it's really going to get interesting. But one thing that Sony have pursued that has been kind of their MO this last year that I have not seen anything from Canon or Nikon in terms of their goals in lens design is autofocus. And Sony have this system now where they've quit making lenses with rotational actuators. Everything's gone to focus by wire, but you have actually a linear actuator, and you have terms like thrust that come involved. And now you have cameras that can actually autofocus in real time, which for a high-speed sports photographer, that makes sense. For video shooting, that makes sense. I'm recording on an A7 III right now. I make all my videos on that, and I use autofocus with face detection because I want it in focus, and I can't film and be a cameraman at the same time. But it's going to be interesting to see Canon and Nikon start doing things other than just optics, because I think that's the other component that's going to be very important. Anyway, I would love to know what you guys think, so drop me a comment below. I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, later.